So, all right. Well, it's 7:02 on my watch, so let's get started. Thank you all for coming. If you're joining us online, there's a few people online. Thank you for joining us there. I have the live stream on my phone in front of me, so if you have a question and you're online, type it in. I will try to remember to look, and we'll see what happens. And I can already see that like half of me is cut off, but that's okay because the information's on the slides anyways. So. Yeah, this is, I'll turn the volume down so I don't hear my echo. This is informational meeting for our congregational meeting, which is coming up a week from Sunday. The goal of this meeting is to provide information, provide clarity regarding the topics that are going to be covered at our annual congregational meeting so that we don't spend 3 hours in a meeting after we spend, an hour and a few minutes after, over an hour in church. Because it's going to be, it just makes for a really long morning. So the goal of the congregational meeting is to make decisions. The goal of these informational meetings is to have conversation and ask questions and whatever else ahead of time. So whether you're watching now or later and in here, if you have questions, feel free to stop me, and we'll kind of have some time for questions after each category of things that we're going to talk about. There is a link there. I've sent the link out in the emails. All of this stuff, all of the latest documents, latest versions of these documents are all online. We've made some grammatical edits and things like that. Nothing content-wise has changed, but we continue to update those documents online as we go. So we're going to break this meeting down into 3 categories because there's a lot of stuff that's being covered in our congregational meeting because of our transition out of the Reformed Church in America and into the Alliance of Reformed Churches. We have a lot of things that we need to vote on to kind of make official, and it can feel like a lot of information. So when I break it down into 3 categories, the first one is things that are staying the same. We have a bunch of things that were staying the same. We approve them this year, and they just continue on the way they have. We have things that are being updated, so a couple of things that need some updating legally or things that we felt as a consistory that needed to be updated based on our presence in this new denomination, and then things that we are proposing to change, and these would be bigger changes, and we'll get into that when we get there. So the first thing we're going to talk about is things that are staying the same, right? Good news first, bad news, not bad news, but good news, easy stuff to digest first. Things that are staying the same. This year, elder and deacon selection process is staying the same. You all got the nomination packets, you all circled, or at least a lot of people did, circled their names and brought it back, and we tallied it up and whatever else, and so we have a slate of elders and deacons. The other thing that's staying the same is our budget and budget process. So the elder and deacon slate you can see here. I'm very happy with the response. We had a very truncated timetable with the nomination thing because of some sickness and some life events and things just kind of threw us all off in the office for a couple weeks. But having only a week and a half to really do it and doing it kind of online for the first time, we had a really fair amount of responses. I'm very happy about that. And this is the slate. So at the congregational meeting, we will vote on the approval of this slate. So we don't vote on people. We vote on the whole slate to approve or not approve the slate of elders and deacons, and then we draw them from, I think, one of the offering plates, actually. We'll pray over them. Elders will be drawn first this year, and deacons will be drawn second. That's our normal process. Nothing's really changed there. The other thing that hasn't changed is the budget. And I say hasn't changed because our process for formulating the budget hasn't changed. And you can also see that the bottom line at the end of the day, the number 425, it is not changing either. And this was on purpose. Remember last year that we talked about how we were going to eliminate this debt, and we wanted to do that so that we could use the money that we were paying towards the debt for ministry purposes. And so when we are projecting that we are going to have that debt eliminated by the end of this year. Our first week of matching campaign, we didn't say this on Sunday because I didn't actually know, but we brought in $5,000 in that first week, so that's really awesome for 1 week of the matching campaign, and we're going to push that hard through Thanksgiving, and we believe that we are going to have that debt eliminated, and so we prepared a budget based on that belief. Now, I have to be upfront in saying that I was reminded by financial people that you can't actually do that. We actually still have debt. And so proposing a budget based on no debt when we still have debt is actually kind of a financial no-no. We believe that God is going to bless our efforts, and we believe that that debt is going to pay it off. I was reminded in a conversation this morning that the consistories actually talked about that contingency a little bit, and we have a plan. We are not going to start 2023 with a debt payment. If that means that we have to if we have to adjust some money away from capital improvement at first and pay that off and then come back to it, that's what we will do, but we are not going to start 2023 with a debt payment, period. At the end of the year, we often have we often, and are projecting right now, a giving versus spending surplus, quote unquote. And so that money, if we still had some debt, we will roll that into the debt payment as well. I had this, I don't want to call it vision, but I just had this thought. I was like, what if we had, like, let's just say $16,500 left in our debt payment, and our surplus was $16,500, and God was just cool like that, right? Like, because that's what God does. So whatever that's going to be, January 1, 2023, we will have zero debt. And then you can see in the budget, the goal was we're going to roll these things back into ministry purposes. So you'll see some internal stuff. We added a bunch of money to the property budget. All of that is capital improvement money. It's for some projects that need to happen around here. And you see a lot of money in the outreach budget. And we're going to continue to do more. Part of our 3-year goal and our vision is that we're going to have 6 regular community engagement events. And so we need to throw money behind that because events cost money, and everything costs money. So you can see that in the budget as well. The big recipients for that rollover money is in the outreach budget and in the property budget. So things that are staying the same. Anybody have any questions about things that are staying the same? Bob. Yes. Yes. Yep. That's exactly right. So we'll first use the surplus, if there, whatever the surplus is, giving over spending at the end of the year, and then we would look to the capital improvement fund or budget, whatever, and pay from there if that was necessary. I don't believe it is. I think God's going to wipe this thing out before Christmas, and it's going to be a done deal, period, because God is awesome, and He has all the money anyways. So, right? Any other questions on things that are staying the same? They're delayed by about a minute. So if there are, we'll circle back around to it. Things that are being updated. So 2 things now. Remember, beginning of last year, or middle of this year, 2022, we voted as a congregation to leave the Reformed Church in America and to partner with the Alliance for Reformed Churches. And so doing that has caused a lot of background work that has needed to take place. And so we've been managing that and kind of working our way through that process. And things that need to be updated, first, are Articles of Incorporation. Articles of Incorporation are a legal document. We'll talk about that in a minute. And a statement of faith and beliefs as well. So these are 2 things that the substance, the reality of what they are and what they represent aren't being changed, but they are being updated based on this transition. So Articles of Incorporation is a legal document. It's filed with the state. It's just the state's way of knowing that we are an entity and what we are as an entity. And so we're going to do a few things in this update. The first thing is that we are officially going to change our name to Hopkins Community Church. This is what we've been going by for, I think, 5 years at least now, maybe 6. We refer to ourselves as Hopkins Community Church. We live out our lives, our ministry life as Hopkins Community Church. And so what we're going to do is write Hopkins Community Church in our name, and then we're going to have it do business as Hopkins Community Reformed Church, because we also understand that it's a hard habit to break, that people will still write HCRC on their checks and whatever else. It's just a reality that we're going to have. So we're going to do that. The other thing we're changing, obviously, is the denominational affiliation. The Alliance Reformed Churches will now show on there instead of the Reformed Church in America. We also have to include a dissolution rider. And that was something that the RCA requires of every single church that has ever left the denomination, that if in the first 5 years after we leave the denomination, we were to dissolve or split in some way that would cause us to leave this property and leave this church, that the real property of this church would revert back to the classes from which we came or whatever organization supersedes that, because there's only like 4 or 5 churches left in that classes right now. So somewhere, somebody would end up with our property. Now, it sounds a little bit fishy, but there's actually a reason for it. The RCA, way back when they actually figured this thing out, because this wasn't something they just approved a few years ago, this is something that's been around for a long, long time, doesn't want there to be an incident where a church decides to leave the denomination and go to a place where the new denomination doesn't want their building, and then close up shop, sell the property, and distribute the money amongst itself, right? It's a little fishy, but Satan's kind of a little fishy. So there's actually a logical reason behind this. And the RC has required, as part of the gracious separation that they're doing right now, that every church that does this is going to have to write this rider into their Articles of Incorporation. And in doing so, we are committed then to 5 years of, if we were to dissolve, I don't see that happening. I don't believe it's going to happen. I mean, we're doing ministry gangbusters right now, and it's really awesome. But if that were to happen, that our church property would then revert back to the RCA. It's just something, it was something they required us to do. We have updated some names and information, and we cleaned up the document a lot because it has gone through a lot of small little revisions over the years, and the last one was almost 20 years ago, and it really, I think we still have the old address on our current one and whatever else. It's kind of ridiculous. So anyways, Articles of Incorporation needed to be updated. It's all updated. Again, it doesn't really affect anything for real for us, but it is what we had to do. The second thing that we decided to update was the Statement of Faith and Beliefs. And remember, we actually created this Statement of Faith and Beliefs several years ago, and we did it in kind of response to and preparation for what was coming in the RCA. And we've committed to circling back to it as elders every single year, reading through it and saying, is this still who we are? Are there things in here that we maybe shouldn't have? I doubt that would ever happen. Or are there things in here that we should add? In our transition out of the RCA and into the Alliance of Reformed Churches, something has changed in the sort of governance, the over-governance of churches, in that the RCA had this big old thing called the Book of Church Order, and it told us some of the things we could do and couldn't do. It told us a lot of the things we could do and couldn't do. And one of those things, it was, you have to, or you cannot stand in the way of the ordination of women. That was something the RCA believed. It's also something that I agree with. And it's something that we as a church have already done. We have had a female pastor here before, Pastor Sarah. We have had female elders and female deacons. It's been something that we've done. In the Alliance, they recognize that not every church is there yet. And there are some very conservative churches who aren't doing that and are very much against that. And the Alliance has decided that this is not a core gospel issue. And so they didn't write it into their statement of faith and things that you have to agree to if you're going to come into the Alliance. Human sexuality, yes. Women in ministry, no. I can see a difference here. I think one is much more kind of core to biblical doctrine, and I see the arguments for women in ministry, even though I disagree with them. I don't think that they have a sound biblical thing. Anyways, we decided as elders that it would be good for us to write into our Statement of Faith and Beliefs a statement on what we believe the Bible says about the ordination of women. So this particularly refers to women as pastors, elders, and deacons. That's really what this gets at. Nobody really argues whether or not women should teach Sunday school. Actually, there's a lot of people that argue that that's all they should do, which is stupid. But did I say that? I don't feel strongly about this at all. Anyways, so we added a whole section about what we believe about the ordination of women into the statement of faith. And we did that as elders. We went through that a couple of times. We approved it and sent it to the consistory. The consistory approved it, and now our process is that we send it to the congregation. The congregation has to approve that update as well. And so those are the two things that are being updated. They're important updates. I think realistically, both updates, the Articles of Incorporation and the Statement of Faith and Beliefs, are updates based on who we are already. It's just our documents catching up to our current reality and what we are and where we're going. So those are the two things that are being updated. Does anybody have any questions about the things that are being updated? Diane? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's a good question. So Dan's question is, from the moment that we decided to join the Alliance to today, what is the difference in the number of churches? And the answer is probably about 100. There's been 100 more churches that have joined the Alliance since. We were kind of right on the beginning. I don't know that the Alliance had maybe more than 10 churches officially that had decided to join at the point that we voted to join them. So, yeah, I would say that they have gained 100, and I know that in some of the conversations that I've been in with Zoom meetings and things like that, they have another 40 to 50 in the works right now. They're also expecting another 50 to 100 churches by the end of 2023. Then that's a conservative guess for them. So, and they're working with churches globally. Globally, I mean, Canada is technically, so it's not America, right? So it becomes global at that point in time. They're working with churches in Canada. They're working with churches in South Africa. They're working with churches in, I believe they're working with churches in Central America for sure. But a lot of that, I mean, the global aspect of it becomes a little bit more difficult because of different governments and things like that. So I think the last number was, I want to say 120, maybe 100, 110, 120, right around there, and more every day. It seems like every month there's a kind of a new batch of churches that come in. So it's pretty exciting. It's been really exciting to follow. So yeah. 120 church. So globally, yeah, the 120 churches are in North America. In the United States of America. So and actually in the lower 48 states. So everywhere from New Jersey to Washington, California, Texas, Florida. There's actually, if you go to arc21.org, there's a map, and you can actually see the map and pick on the different states, and it'll tell you how many churches are how many churches are in conversation and process, and so on and so forth. So it's really cool. It's a good thing. So any other questions on things that are being updated? All right. Great. The chat is quiet, so we will move on to the meat and potatoes of tonight's evening, which is things that we are proposing to change. And what you'll see there, the leadership structure and the bylaws, they're kind of one in the same in that the leadership structure, we're changing the bylaws to reflect a conversation we've been having about leadership structure. And so I'm going to try to lay this out in as succinct style as possible, and then we'll kind of interact around it, questions, whatever, when we kind of get through it. So here it is. The current reality. Current reality is that we have a consistory, which is the governing body of the church. And the consistory is made up of elders, deacons, and pastors. And each of those three groups have their own individual responsibilities. So elders, you can see here, elders are responsible for spiritual oversight, for some administration, and kind of administration and management of ministries, spiritual care, so it would be like calling, visiting people, things like that, and then oversee worship. Deacons they oversee physical needs, so physical needs for people, physical needs of the church, financial collection, financial management in some cases, and then the benevolence fund, which is our help fund. So that would be managing the finances specifically to help people with physical needs. So deacons are really about the physical care of the church and the community. Pastors are responsible for teaching, for preaching, for leading ministries, and for equipping ministry leaders and volunteers within the church, equipping the body to do ministry. That's really, if you want to get down to the main crux of it, my goal as a pastor is to work myself out of a job so that this church is functioning so well and everybody's feeling so equipped and empowered to do what they do that I could go and Caleb would just have to preach all the time. That's just what would happen, right? That's the goal, right? We want to see that empowerment and that equipping in the church so that the church can be the body of Christ that we're called to be. The consistory has its own sort of responsibilities as well, and some of those responsibilities include administration and business. So the consistory makes sort of the businessy decisions for the church. They make the big decisions. When, if we go back to when Pastor Caleb or even myself were called, at the end of the day, it was a consistory decision. The consistory sought the mind of the congregation. We had congregational meetings. There was a search team that gave some recommendations and all of that. But at the end of the day, the consistory is the one who makes the final stamp of approval and signs their name on the paper and all that. So administration, business, leadership, finances, empowering, all of this, the consistory is a ministry of making things happen in the church and taking care of the business of the church as well. And all of that, so the elders, the deacons, the pastors all sit on consistory and participate in those things. Sorry, the consistory is the commitment for each office is a little different. Elders have an elders meeting, deacons meet occasionally as well, and obviously pastoral staff, we have our own thing going on too. So we all have the elder deacon commitments, but we also all have the consistory commitment, and we are, each of us, filling roles as elder and deacon, and in the consistory, we're filling those roles regardless of the gifting that we have. And so the consistory work is the consistory work. We're doing all that work. We're attending all those meetings, and we're doing it regardless of whether we're gifted or not. We have a lot of people in consistory. Surprised, this is going to be really surprising for the 12 of you that are here, because everybody loves meetings so much apparently, right? There are people that don't like meetings. It's a shocker, but there are people that actually aren't really geared towards sitting in meetings. Right? It's just not their thing. They'll give you the shirt off their back to help you with anything, and whatever their gifting is and whatever they feel passionate about, they will do it in a heartbeat. But you ask them to come to a meeting, man, it's kind of energy sucking. So we're doing these regardless of meetings. Now, the question, or the natural question is, does this work? Yeah. It's worked. It has worked for this congregation for the past 70 years. 70 years ago, this congregation joined the RCA, and the structure that we have with the elder, deacon, pastor, and all of us on consistory has worked. It's worked. We've managed, the business of the, we're moving forward in ministry. We're following God's vision for us here in Hopkins community. We're following God's vision for Hopkins, the community of Hopkins, right? It's really cool. The question that we asked ourselves, because we are moving out of the RCA, which has dictated, in reality, has kind of dictated for us the way that we should do this. There are exceptions to the rule, but on the whole, this is the way that the RCA says we should do this. The question we started to ask ourselves is this: is there a better option? Is there a better way to think about ministry and leadership in the church that would be more efficient and more directed towards people's gifts and passions in a way that utilizes people in specific areas where they're gifted and doesn't force them to spend time and energy in places where they're not? And that is the big question. And so we're proposing to the congregation this year that we restructure the way that we have leadership set up in a way that is more gifts-based and less kind of what we have been doing, hoping that it will bring more people into it and see more people utilized in places where they have gifts and where God is calling them. Because interestingly enough, the meetings side of things has been a large inhibitor for a lot of people who'd say, I would love to help, I would love to do A, B, and C, but if I have to go to 2 to 4 hours of meetings a month, I'm just not going to do that. I don't want to do that. So this is our proposal, and this is kind of the beginning of it right here. There are elders, there are deacons, there are pastors. These are 3 biblical offices. These are things that are laid out in Scripture. We have a very strong biblical argument for them, and we want to acknowledge that those things exist because they're in the Bible and because this is the way that the church has functioned for the past 2,000 plus years now. And we also want to recognize that these are 3 different offices of ministry. And as you saw earlier, they all have their own different areas of expertise, areas of care, areas of management, areas of gifts. We also want to recognize that within the offices of ministry, particularly elders and deacons, there are different roles within those offices. So within the office of elder, there are oversight and administration avenues, and there are also care avenues, right? There's a spiritual care of things. We ask our elders to make contact with the church at least twice, hopefully 3 to 4 times a year, where you have a district and you are supposed to call, make contact with, talk to them on Sunday, whatever it is, and make regular contact. We also ask our elders to do the spiritual oversight, to take a look at curriculum and to think about how ministry is happening and all this. And those 2 things, they're different. They're actually very different. They're incredibly different. We have elders on our elder board right now. Some of them are very gifted in the administrative and oversight realm, and we have some who are very gifted in the spiritual care realm. And it is very rare that we find one person who has all of both of those gifts, or even some of both of those gifts. They often don't overlap, right? People that like to go to meetings are, they like to do meetings and they like to think, kind of high-level leadership stuff. We like to think theology. And I say, hey, have you been making your phone calls? And you're like, oh. Like, it makes their stomach turn because it's not their thing. It's not that they don't want to do it, and it's not that they don't care. It's just, it's not for them, right? They're great oversight elders. And care elder things are just not their thing. And I get that. The same is true with our deacons. I think it's actually more true with our deacons. The differentiation between the two major points for deacons is even more, I think, glaring. You have the physical care side of things, where we have people in this congregation, with lots of people in this congregation, who can do things, and they can help people, whether it's physically, like doing the trade type stuff or building something. We have people that can do that, and we have people that want to do all sorts of things. Like, I'll go get groceries for someone, I'll go do this, whatever else, right? And then there's the financial side, and most of, if not all of our deacons see the financial side and go, yeah, we got to do that too. So the deacons collect money, but at the end of the day, it's like that's a hard thing because a lot of those things are different, right? They're different. Our financial folks aren't necessarily people who are going to swing a hammer. Not that they can't, but it's not their gifting, it's not their passion. On the same token, right, we have people who are so gifted and so willing to care for people, but they come to the meeting after a day of working construction, and they are bushed, for one, right? They're completely wiped out from working all day, and it's just not their thing. And it's an energy suck, right? It's an energy suck for them. And so when you then approach them to do something else, it's like, I already gave 4 hours to meetings. Well, it's hard. They have families and the whole bit. It's hard. So there's a differentiation in the gifts of deacons and in the elders. And we want to recognize that. We want to recognize the gifts that are associated with these roles, and then we want to encourage people to fit into the place where they are gifted well so that we can see them utilize the gifts that God has given them to build up the church. This is really, so it kind of matches the Bible, incidentally. If you look in Acts, the beginning of Acts, the apostles were teaching, and people were coming up to them with issues about needs. Hey, these people didn't get fed. Hey, these people aren't getting visited, and so on and so forth. The widows, and the this, and the that. And the apostles, they go, we need to teach the gospel. Like, we're supposed to be preaching the gospel. That's what God has called us to do. And so what do? They pray together, and they discern 7 individuals and say, you all are filled with the Spirit, and you have these gifts. You go and make sure that the food is being distributed. You make sure that everybody's getting taken care of the way they need to be taken care of, because we can't stop teaching the gospel. That's what that's what we need to do. It's what we are called to do. And that's how deacons were born. I think it's Acts 5, 4, 5, 3. The beginning of Acts, right? They discerned that there was a need. They recognized that their gifts and their calling was this way, and that they needed people to go this way, and so they did it. The same is true if you look at 1 Corinthians 12, right? You are all members of one body, and yet not all of you have the same gifts. The eye cannot say to the hand, because you're not an eye, I don't need you. Right? The foot cannot say to the ear, because you're not a foot, I don't need you, right? Not everybody's an eye, not everybody's a nose, not everybody's a foot. We are all part of the body. And when all of the body is being utilized in the way that it's meant to be utilized, the body is functioning in a healthy way. And it builds up the body, right? That's the way we are called to live as a church. Why would we not apply that to leadership as well? And so that's the idea. We want to have elders, deacons, and pastors that are equipped in various avenues of ministry. In the same way, like Pastor Caleb has a big passion for family ministry, and youth ministry. He has a great passion for youth ministry. And I love kids. I love my kids. I love your kids. But I'm not a youth pastor. I'm not. And it's not that I don't want to hang out, and it's not that I don't love to have those conversations. I don't want to build. I want to do that, but it's just not my gifting. And I know that. My brother's a gifted youth pastor too, and I bless him for that, right? It's good. We are all given gifts to use for the kingdom of God. And that's what we want to acknowledge and we want to live into as elders, deacons, and pastors. We also want to then, because we're talking about specific giftings and specific ministry, we also recognize that the business portion of the consistory still needs to happen, right? The sort of big picture stuff, the decision-making and things like that, that has to happen somewhere. And so what we are proposing is to formulate we call it a board of directors, or the board, B-O-A-R-D, not B-O-R-E-D, the board of directors. And these are people who would be elected from the congregation to a year, 3-year terms, kind of like we do in consistory right now with the elders and deacons, and they would be elected to be on the board of directors, and they would serve on multiple, in that capacity as sort of doing the business work that the consistory does currently. They would also be an accountability body for elders, deacons, and pastors. So there would be constant and consistent reports that would be headed to the board of directors so that there would be accountability in what's been happening, what care has been done. How can we, have you been doing, physical care? Have you been seeking to do physical care? What contacts have been made, care elders? Or, all of these things, reports going up to the board of directors. And they would be sort of the oversight for all of Hopkins Community Church and staffing as well. They would be the body that oversees the staff of the church too. So the board of directors would be the sort of business portion of Hopkins Community Church, and they would take on a lot of those roles that the consistory already does, and they would make some of those big decisions. I want to note in that the board of directors, as I said before, is six elected people. We wanted this to be, we wanted to balance the elected side of things. I think having an election selection process like we do now is good. I think it's a really good thing. I do not and never will believe that the entire leadership of any church should be selected, and particularly it should not be selected by the pastor. So if any pastor ever stands up here and says, I'm going to pick every leader, don't do that. That's bad, right? That's ego. And we don't like that. It never works out well for the church. So the board of directors is going to be an elected body, and elected or in the same process, right? Nominated from the body, from the congregation. If you're a member or what we call missional partner, then you would be able to nominate people to be on the board of directors, and those would be selected each year, just like we do now. Instead of doing elders and deacons, we would just do board members or trustees, if you want to call them that, right? The elders and the deacons would be appointed by the board of directors. I say appointed. You can also think in there recognized. Because the reality is, a lot of people in this church are already doing a lot of the things that we're talking about. We have people in this church who are visiting our shut-ins, visiting our sick, visiting people that have surgery or whatever. And they do that because it's what they do. They are elders, care elders at heart. They love to do it, and we should recognize that and also ask them to be a part of the big picture ministry so that we know who's being visited and who's not being visited and make sure that there's no gaps in there. We want to make sure that nobody is falling between the cracks. And I'll be the first to admit that in the last 2 to 3 years with COVID and the denominational transition and stuff like that, that's been really hard for me to keep up. It's been really hard for me to keep up. I'll acknowledge my own failures in that. Like, it's been hard. But we have people who have been doing that in the midst of it all. And those people should be recognized as care elders, appointed as care elders, and then asked to participate in the whole ministry of it so that we know what's happening. Maybe we get more regular updates about prayer requests and stuff like that. And I wouldn't have to do all of them all the time. That we could have, like, people sending reports to the board of directors that would be disseminated to the congregation. We could continue to pray and pray more effectively even. So the same is true with deacons. We have people in this church, incidentally, who get asked to help with things all the time. And they're more than willing. Apparently, everybody knows who to ask for things, and it never actually comes to the deacons itself, the deacon board itself, or the consistory, because it's like, oh, I know that so-and-so does, right? I always go to this one because it's easy. I know that Raj does plumbing, so I just call Raj, right? If I have a need, I just call Raj. Well, that's great. Like, and if Raj is even watching right now, I doubt that actually. But if he was watching right now, he would recognize, like, I recognize that Raj has a gift for care, like caring, physical care as a deacon. He's willing to do it. And so, like, we have people like that. So if we can recognize that and then enfold them into the big picture ministry of what's going on, I think in general, we'll be able to care for each other more. We'd also apply finance. We have finance people in this congregation that are very underutilized and would love to be a part of that and help us with that, but they don't get nominated and then selected for deacons. And so, like, again, the idea of appointing isn't to handpick our leadership. It's to recognize gifting and insert people and where they are gifted for the purpose of ministry within the church. One other thing that we wanted to add in here is the leadership team. This idea, I don't know if this is a good name or not, but what we wanted to do is create a sort of bottom for this too. So, right, the board of directors is smaller than the consistory. We understand that. And we also recognize that in a lot of cases, there are big decisions that maybe would require more heads than just the board of directors. And so we wanted to create this leadership team which brings in everybody. So we have the board of directors, we have all the deacons, all of the elders, all of the pastors, and all of the ministry team leaders. So head of Sunday school, head of youth group, or the head of a high school youth group, head of the middle school youth group, head of hospitality, whatever. We bring everybody into the same room and say, this is what's before us right now. We need to discern together what the best decision for that is. And we created some parameters for maybe some of those big picture decisions. We also talked about meeting once per year. All of those people get together once per year to walk through the pre-congregational meeting stuff, so that everyone is at the table when we talk about budget. Everyone is at the table when we talk about board of directors, who's nominated. Everyone is at the table when we talk about vision for the next year. Everyone is at the table and a part of those conversations. I hate to say this, right, because we just said, you're all part of the body, right? But we also recognize that there are major players and major leaders in the congregation who are doing a lot of volunteer work to make ministries happen here. And that is good, and we want them to be more a part of big decisions and big ministry stuff than they are right now. So, board of directors, elders, deacons, pastors, leadership team. The packet of information that you have here, this is a visual representation. It's my my attempt at trying to put down on paper a visual version of this before we tried to write it down in the bylaws as well. And so this is some snippets from that. The board of directors just kind of go back to what leadership is saying something and then saying what you just said to help clarify things. So board of directors, responsible for the executive leadership of Hopkins Community Church, members serve the trustees of Hopkins Community Church. That's actually legal language based on our Articles of Incorporation. There would be 6 nominated and selected members from the congregation. These would be voting people. These would be the people that make the decisions, right? At the end of the day, when we say, do you approve the budget for 2024? I, right? There would be some unelected members that wouldn't have a vote, but would be on this board as well. The president would be the senior pastor, so the senior pastor would be responsible for setting the agenda for this board. There'd be a vice president that would be a head oversight elder, and then there'd be a treasurer, would be the head finance deacon. And the goal would be that there's some continuity. The board will turn over there'd be new people coming on and off every year, right? But we want to have some continuity. Our thought process is that if we have people that are engaged and using their gifts, that there will be longevity in those places, so that we would have somebody who's functioning as a finance deacon and probably would be doing that for maybe several years because they're living into their gift and it's a passion of theirs, and they gain energy from it because they're doing something that they love and they're doing something for the church and for Christ, for God. And so there would be some consistency there. The same is true maybe with oversight elders, that there would be consistency and longevity in those things. There'd also be a clerk, a non-voting member, but a clerk, somebody who's recording the minutes and keeping track of everything that's happening. The board of directors would likely, I think, meet monthly, because kind of have a month-to-month just keeping track of everything, receive reports from all of the elders and deacons groups and whatever else, and meet monthly to go over those reports, hear about the budget, do we have any big decisions, talking about where we're at with things and stuff like that. I know that you can't read this. It's on this document, but I wanted to put it in front of you because it's important. So we have care elders and overseers, which you could also call administrative elders. I mean, I don't know, you pick your poison when it comes to what term you want to use. Then finance deacons and care deacons. And I made a chart, essentially, that talks about specifically what are the responsibilities for each of these. And so if you look, right, the care deacons are responsible for the help fund, for the physical care of the congregation, for the service and care within the community, for care of the church property, like working with our custodial staff, and they'd be responsible for regular ministry reports on what they are doing and how we have helped people. So anytime that we use the help fund, anytime that we're physically helping anybody or doing things around the church, there would be a report that would be made by the care deacons, which would be led by, like, one person would be the head care deacon, and that would be sent to the board of directors. Finance deacons, I mean, you can kind of guess what is going on here, but right, they are responsible for overseeing collection, overseeing the receiving of tithes and offerings, counting, and overseeing the depositing of money, making sure that happens, working alongside Kathy with budgeting and stuff like that. They're responsible for doing audits. We haven't done an audit here in a while, and it's important to do those things. They'd be like, if we were to do a big fundraiser, we'd say, hey, finance deacons, right? This is kind of your thing. Like, can we work with you to kind of push this thing along, or whatever else? Doing projections, whatever else. Administrative elders, spiritual oversight, including a kind of oversight of all the ministry leaders, oversight of the pastors, oversight of things like curriculum. There'd be overseeing, like, okay, the high school youth group wants to use X curriculum, and so the oversight elders, the administrative elders, whatever they do, they would, or whatever we call them, they would say, oh, let's look at this, let's look through this, okay, this looks good, like we feel like this is something good for, like they would be checking in with all of the different ministries as far as that's concerned. And like I said, one of these overseers, the head overseer or head administrative elder, would also be the vice president of the board. Care elders, again, prayer, spiritual care for the congregation, assisting the pastor in visiting. So I'm not trying to abdicate my responsibility here. I want to do these things. It's not that I don't want to visit people and call people and talk to people and stuff like that. It's not that. It's that we want to make sure that that's happening on a very regular basis, regardless of whatever pastor, that the congregation is caring for itself, right? That there are people that are equipped to do that, and we want to make sure that that's happening. And so I would come alongside them and do visiting, because they are very gifted in that, and I'm kind of gifted in that. Visiting shut-ins, visiting people in the hospital, and so on and so forth. In this chart, and there's some hard copies of this in the back, you will see there's a list of biblical qualifications. We wanted to make sure that the Bible actually speaks to these certain things, and there are also biblical precedent for these things as well. We wanted to make sure that the Bible actually speaks to who these people should be. So there are qualifications for elders and deacons and how they live their lives, right? Nobody's perfect. I totally understand that. But in general, that people are living their lives in a way that is glorifying to God and following Scripture, but also that there's a biblical precedent for these particular offices. Size. This is kind of a big deal too, because we wanted to make sure that they were big enough, but not necessarily too big in some cases. So there's always a pastor. There's always somebody filling the pastoral role in the church. That is something that is, I think you could very easily make a biblical argument for that. Even if it's not an ordained pastor, there's somebody filling the pastoral role, and that's good. Overseers, we'd say not less than 5. We want to make sure that there's a good core group of people. We didn't necessarily want to put a cap on it, but there should be, it shouldn't be just one. There should be several. And we believe that there are several within this congregation even now. Finance deacons, that there would be at least 3. And obviously, there's a lot of reason for why there should be more than one finance deacon managing money and things like that, right? So that there would be a group of finance deacons. And then care elders and care deacons. The word unlimited is written there. There's a reason for that. We don't want to put a cap on this, for one, because the goal would be that there are, and particularly on the care elder side, that there would be a whole bunch of care elders that would be organized and stuff. Can you imagine if we had 20 care elders and you were to divide those up into teams of 2, so you'd have 10 groups of care elders, and each of them, we have a congregation of maybe 200, so each of them would be responsible. You have 200 divided by 10, responsible for 20 people, right? Can you imagine the depth of relationship and the more intimate relationship that could be had if you have a care elder who is responsible for just 20 people instead of 40 or 50 people, right? Like, we would love to see more people that have these gifts utilizing them, because then you see the depth of relationship, and let's say Kyle goes into the hospital, but Kyle's heard Kyle's has had many conversations with his care elder. And so when his care elder shows up, it's not just some random person from the congregation that he talked to maybe twice this year, if that. It's somebody that he's had regular conversations with, and he trusts this person. And there is a connection there that is deeper than just, I'm required to call you twice a year, so I did. That's the kind of thing that we're trying to build. The same is true with the care deacons. We want to have a lot of people who have varied gifts and can be called on to do things, care things, whatever those things are, whether it's building things or go getting groceries, or maybe it's taking care of kids or whatever it is, that we have people, lots of people that are willing to do that. All these people would ultimately be appointed by the board of directors. They would have the final say. We want to do some vetting as far as like biblical qualifications. We also want to do some vetting based on gifts, because that's the whole idea here. Is like we want you to know your spiritual gifts, and we want to plug you in where you are gifted. Length of service. This is the other thing that's kind of a big change. And I said this a little while ago. Longevity, I think, is going to happen, and we didn't want to put a cap on length of service for these offices. And there's a reason for that. We already do this with pastors. When we call a pastor, we believe that God is calling the pastor to the church, and we also believe that pastor has the maturity, spiritual wherewithal to discern when that calling ends. We believe that God calls people to places for a time, and that he calls them away for a time. And that is a natural part of ministry, and it's been a natural part of church life for 2,000 years. Right? Paul was even called to places and then called away from places. He was blocked at times from going to places. And the reality of this is that we believe that you all, the congregation, also have that ability, because you all have the Holy Spirit in you. And so if you feel called to be a care elder, who are we to say you're only called for 2 years? That's not how the Spirit works. We believe that if you feel called to be a care elder, that you have the depth of relationship with Christ Jesus, that you can discern with the Holy Spirit when God is saying, you know what? You've cared for someone, you've been a care elder for 8 years, and I think it's time for you to rest now. Or I think it's time for you to be over here now, or whatever. We believe that you have that ability, and so we don't want to put a limit on that. We would like to ask for like a year-by-year commitment. So it's like at the end of each year, we're going to give out a sort of survey, a self-evaluation to say, hey, how's it been going? Like, what's been good? What's been a struggle for you? Do you feel called to the next year? And ask that. I mean, obviously things happen, and in the middle of the year, people have to step down or step out for emergent reasons or whatever. We understand that. But in general, what we would like to do is at the beginning or the end of one year and then transition to the next, that everybody on the care elders, care deacons, finance deacons, overseers would get an evaluation, a self-evaluation that they would fill out and then give back to the board of directors. And at the end of the day, that evaluation would say at the bottom, do you feel called to continue this ministry for whatever the next year is, right? 2024. And you would either put yes or no. And that you would be able to do that discerning work with the Holy Spirit to determine whether God is calling you to continue in the ministry that you're in, or to maybe step back for a time of discernment as to the next thing that he might be calling you to. And so that's the idea behind the length of service, that we trust your discernment along with the Holy Spirit. Every one of those groups is going to have a head person. There's a senior pastor. There's going to be a head overseer, administrative elder, or whatever, a head care deacon. Like, somebody has to be the point person for these things. It's not just a free-for-all. It's just common sense leadership stuff, right? And then there's at the very end of this chart, there is a section where it kind of talks about primary spiritual gifts, the spiritual gifting that you have. And what does that look like for you, and where do you feel like you could plug in? So if you know your spiritual gifts already, awesome. We can start talking about where you might get plugged in as we start to build this thing out over the next year. And if you don't, then we have the opportunity to explore that together. And we really want to do that with the congregation over the next 6 months or so, 6 months to a year, is to explore everyone's spiritual gifting so that they have a place to get plugged in. And finally, leadership team, talked about this already, all care elders, overseers, care deacons, finance deacons, pastors, ministry team leaders, and board members. Everybody gets together, meets at least once a year in October to go over all of this stuff that we're talking about right now so that everybody's on the same page, everybody has a chance to speak into it, and whatever else. Also would be called together for issues of major importance. This would be like a kind of a secondary to a congregational meeting. Not that it would eliminate congregational meetings, but it would happen. It would be kind of like a buffer. Hey, we don't need to call this congregational meeting because everybody on the leadership team thinks this is really dumb, except for like the 3 people that got it in their head that they want to do this, right? So it would be a buffer to that everybody would, so like, let's just say that we get out of debt, we build this whole thing out, and January 2024, somebody on the new board of directors says, hey, we should take on a big loan and do an expansion. Well, everybody's going to get together as a leadership team and say, is this a good idea? Or how should we approach this? And have a conversation, have a discerning time together with everybody, at all the major players at the table, before we were to bring it to the congregation and say, is this what God is calling us to or not? These could be vision, like mission, vision, big picture things like that. In 2028, we will be discerning what is God calling us to the next 7 years or the next year or 5 years or whatever it is. Also calling a pastor. Like this would be another group of people that would be able to be a part of that kind of big decision making, or consistory, don't disregard that. Like the board of directors, if there's a disagreement where it's a 3-3 tie, and we need more heads in this to think through this and discern through this, bring everybody to the table again, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a lot of talking from me. How about you? I know there'll be a lot. What's that? The reality is that if you look at the way the church is supposed to be structured, everybody should be involved. That's the reality of it, right? What we're trying to do here is pull people off. I'm not trying to pull, our 3 backup catchers and throw them in the outfield. What I want is my 3 catchers playing catcher, right? I guess it's a World Series right now, isn't it? Yeah. Are the Phillies playing tonight? Pastor Jim would know. 8:30? Okay, we'll get out of here before then. So, right? We're not trying to pull all of the catchers in to play pitcher or whatever. We want them to play catcher, and we want our pitchers to play pitcher. We want everybody to be involved in playing in their particular roles, but you want everybody on the team to be able to jump in and be a part of it at a moment's notice, right? We don't want to have any pitchers on our team who don't want to pitch. Right. Exactly. And hopefully have an opportunity, let's just say we, in February, March of this year, we have a new members gathering again. Let's just say we have 10 people that come to that gathering. We have the opportunity at that gathering to say, do you know your spiritual gifts? 5 people can say, I know them. 5 people can say, I don't know them. And say, all right, awesome. You 5, let's sit down and talk through this a little bit so that we can find, instead of just saying, these are all the things you can get plugged into, we could say, hey, you have a great, financial mind. Let's get you plugged in here. Or let's start thinking about what it would look like to maybe be a part, even if you're not a finance deacon, to be a part of the collection and counting team. My hope would be, and I hope this with all of my heart, that not only is this just a way to plug people in, it's also a way to disciple people. So that there are overseers, or administrative elders, but there are also people who have those gifts who are being discipled by the current administrative elders, overseers, whatever we call them, right? And eventually, maybe Bob Lauer is an administrative elder, and he has Kyle as his, somebody he's discipling, and at some point in time, Bob gets called away. You say, I really feel his Spirit is saying, it's time for me to be done here. I've been walking alongside Kyle for the past 2 years, and I think he's ready to step into this role. So it becomes more than just plugging people into their gifts. It becomes almost a leadership pipeline of seeing people discipled and seeing relationships built in a way where we're constantly refreshing and adding to the people who are called to lead. And so whether you're doing it or whether Kyle's doing it, you both have been building this relationship too. Kind of big picture, like, yeah. Yes, Joel. Is there, yeah, so Joel's question, is there any church that's doing this structure right now? So, no, not that I am aware of. And this is kind of, so when I was kind of thinking about this, this originally kind of came to the consistory as a, should we think, let's just think about this, right? At the end of the day, we're making a transition right now. We're kind of moving away from a sort of top-down telling you how to do things or whatever. What could something different look like? Do we want to invest, like, do we want to just kind of discern through this a little bit? Because at the end of the day, if we had asked this question in, what was it, May or June, right after we had the vote, I think it was May, we asked this question, and my statement to the consistory was this: I think that we should think through this over the next several months, and if we all come to the conclusion in August that, the way we're doing things is the best way to do it, then great. We know. And we can say that we're not just defaulting to what we've always done. We can say that we have thought about this hard and we've prayed about this, and we really feel like the way we have things structured right now is the way that God's calling us to do it. Great. When we started looking through this, I started calling churches and talking to pastors and people that I know and stuff like that. A lot of people were doing this elder, deacon, pastor consistory thing that we have been doing. They're all Reformed churches, and this is just how they've always done it. And they all of them said, no, we're not really thinking about changing that at all. It works for us, so we're doing it. And then I had a number of churches that had different structures where there was a pastor, and then there was an executive team that the pastor advised, and then there were elders, and then there were deacons. But the pastor was way up here, and everything that happened through that pastor. And then there was an executive pastor that managed all the other things. But that pastor was at the top and managing the DNA of the church. One of them said, I was like, that is bold. That is a really bold statement. I don't want to carry it. Like, I don't want that. And I don't think it's really biblical either. But we liked the idea of having an accountability body above the elders, deacons, and pastors that the elders, deacons, and pastors were not a part of. Because we can come to consistory meeting often and say, hey, deacons, did you do anything? You have a meeting this month? No. Okay, because we're all there, right? If you have a body that's separated from that can say, we didn't get anything from the board of care elders this month, we make a contact to say, you didn't submit your report this month. What's going on? Do we need to help? Do we have to have a conversation? What's going on? Like, it's kind of like a lateral in some sense, or there's accountability to help things keep moving forward. So is anybody doing this? Not that I know of. Is it possible? Sure. It's kind of structured more like a nonprofit organization, and it kind of takes some of the things that the Alliance itself, the Alliance of Reformed Churches itself, is structuring itself as, where there's a board of directors, and people that are working for the Alliance are actually responsible and accountable to that board of directors instead of telling the board, telling them what we're going to do, that the board of directors is the one doing the sort of directing. Right. Hmm? Let me put it this way, Joel. What if I said, Joel, I think you would make a great care deacon. You don't have to go to maybe more than 2 meetings a year, maybe. But I'd love to have you as a care deacon. I'd love to unfold you into the group of care deacons, and there's going to be some initial build out, but there will be a structure and a function to, like, okay, so we received this call, and we believe that Joel Eating is one of maybe 3 people who could possibly be helpers. We got this call. We're going to call all 3 of them and say, hey, can you guys either put your heads together, do this together, or can one of you take point on it and just do it? You're not going to have to go to any meetings. You don't have to do anything. The benevolence fund is there. It's at your disposal. You can have up to X number of dollars to spend for the materials you need to do this. That's your thing. Done. Would you be more interested in that than saying, hey, Joel, would you like to be a deacon? You have to go to 1 meeting a month at least, probably 2. And also we have the structure that we need. Whenever we need something, we're going to call you as well. Right? That's the biggest question. Yes. Hmm? Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. But I do think, the question you ask, are we going to be able to get people to do this? That is the big question. I think what we've put down on paper, most everything looks good on paper, in its initial stage. And I'll be the first one to admit that this is a living document that if we approve it at the congregational meeting, we are approving it by saying we're going to build this thing over the next year, and our next congregational meeting will have a more finalized draft that is more the reality of the way this built out. Yes. Yep. That's why we're still selecting elders and deacons this year, because we have to do it based on our current bylaws. And then next year, if everything goes well, right? At the end of the day, if we get to September of next year and say this is a hot mess, we're gonna recommend that we just put it back. Okay, fine, right? I get that. We kind of did that with Sunday school way back when too. It's like, hey, we're gonna try to change the time. We understand this might not work, but we kind of think it will. Let's just see. Worst case scenario, we put it back next year, right? And we have a year where we spent some time discerning something that didn't work, right? But yeah, I think it's going to be a year-long build process of trying to get things in order and get people engaged and stuff. And it's going to take some trust. And I think it's going to take some flexibility, and I think it's going to be kind of a one at a time. We kind of have a care team right now, kind of, and so we're going to have to kind of build that up a little bit and create some things for that. And care deacons, we kind of have some function for the way we would like to see care deacons work, but we kind of need to really build that out. And so it's going to take some individualized focus over the next year to build these things out effectively, so that we are functioning well. My hope would be functioning well by the second half of next year, or maybe the last quarter of next year, so that we can come to the next congregational meeting and saying, this is what it looks like now, and these are the people, and we're going to nominate and then select a board of directors that will then begin to function, in staggered roles, 24, 25, 26. So it's going to take time. So. And people. Yeah. Huh? Yep. So we would not do the process that we're talking about here, where we nominate and then select the way with the drawing of names and stuff like that, a board of directors, until next year, because our current bylaws state that we have to do our current process this year. So we have to kind of function by our current rules. That being said, what we might end up doing is we have people in this congregation who have served on board of directors type positions before. who would probably be really, really great at helping us think through this and to say, hey, we would like, as a consistory, because the consistory body will exist until this is built out, the consistory would say, hey, you, and you all have this experience already. We would like to kind of nominate you as a provisional board of directors to help us build this thing out for this year. And that they would start, big decisions would still be made at the consistory level because we have to do that, right? We're building our way into this, but they would begin to function as a board of directors. And then, maybe those people get nominated to continue to function in that role, for the coming years at our next congregational meeting. But we're going to have to build this out kind of in process over the next year. So our initial nomination process will be a little bigger in that we will probably be seeking more people, and when we do the selection, we will select for staggered terms, 3-year term, 2-year term, 1-year term, and then every year after that, it'll be 3-year terms. But otherwise, everybody turns over 3 years from now. So, yeah. And I don't know, maybe we say, hey, we're drawing for 3-year terms now, we're drawing for 2, or maybe the board gets together and says, I'm willing to do 3, hey, I'd only like to do 1. I don't know how we would do that. I'd prefer to leave it up to God personally, but that's more that's my opinion. So. Any other questions? Okay. If you have more questions or concerns or just wonderings in general or whatever, you can talk to me. You can talk to any of the consistory members. We've been talking about this, like I said, since May. I think May, June is when we really started rolling through this, and the initial idea was not a good one. And we kind of revised it and started working through it. It led us to this point. So our goal is to have accountable leadership and effective functioning ministry in this church so that we can be built up as the body of Christ and continue to do ministry at a really high level. We are doing, I say this, and I don't, this isn't bragging, I want to just communicate reality for us. Hopkins Community Church is doing really, really awesome ministry at a really high level. We have a lot of things going on right now, more than I think a lot of churches that are this size, and we're looking to add things next year. We're talking about adding community forums next year. So we're looking at the consistory. We're going to talk about this in the congregational meeting, but this is free for tonight. We're talking about 5 weekend events next year in 2023 that are geared towards addressing key cultural issues for the day. We're going to be having a conversation next week with somebody to come and talk about, come and talk on a Saturday, kind of like what we did with the Go and Tell event, where they come and we have a 2 or 3 hour workshop, a breakfast, and then a workshop or something where there's information and then there's interaction. And they would do that on a Saturday morning, and then they would come back on Sunday and preach. So the first one of those is actually going to be on February 4 and 5. Really, really excited about that. We're talking about doing 5 of those next year. It's not something that we've never done this before, except for the Go and Tell event, which was a smashing success. And it's an opportunity for us to, again, invite the community in and have some more interaction and stuff. So we have a lot of really awesome things going, and I'm super excited about it. And I want to see, my heart is to see us continue to move forward in this in great ways. So, and I hope that in building this out and seeing this work here, that we can be even a leader within the alliance in saying, hey, we have an effective way to do ministry and structure leadership that empowers people and empowers churches and congregations and, right, you, the church, to do ministry together effectively. So, Lord, yep, yep. This will be the defining thing that the consistory will be working on for the next 12 months if it passes. Like assuming we all kind of say, yeah, let's try this, let's do it. You know, like, this will be what this will be the big part of the consistory. And we've already kind of asked this question, but I think we'll ask it again. Where do you see yourself, consistory? Like, you know, because we have people on consistory and functioning as elders and deacons in roles already. So where do you see yourself? And that's going to be a key starting point for us moving forward to see, okay, well, we have, you know, we have 6 care deacons and no finance deacons. Okay, so now we got to figure out what that's going to look like. So I'm excited for it. I think it's really, I think it's really exciting. So, any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. Enjoy the baseball game. 8:30. You still got 11 minutes to get home. Drive, but not too fast. Watch for deer.